All right, y'all. This week we are doing The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. We only have really 2 weeks left of reading. Next week we are doing Black Panther. The following week of class we'll do some web comics, and then we'll be done. So I hope you enjoy these last few weeks of reading comics before we go off into the summer. So Jeff Loeb, the writer, you may recognize his name as a producer as well. He was a producer for Smallville and Lost. He co-wrote the 80s classic Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox. If you haven't seen that, I suggest you do so immediately. And he is a 4-time Eisner Award winner. If you don't know what the Eisner Award is, it is kind of like the Oscars, but for comics. And because it's for comics, it's way better than the regular Oscars because it's not about celebrities. So he's a well-known and well-respected person, both in comics, winning the highest award they have to offer, and also being involved in some of the more popular, well-received, and critically acclaimed TV shows that we've had in a while, especially with Lost. Tim Sale, the artist, is a comics artist. He's also a writer. He's won an Eisner as well. He's also worked on a TV show called Heroes, which you may have known from season 1. Heroes, unfortunately, was on the air right during the writer's strike, so the subsequent seasons really went downhill. But he was an artist for many Batman comics, Spider-Man, Hawk, Catwoman, and a lot of other text. So if you enjoy his art style, you can see it really all over the place. He does a ton of work. As far as the influences on this particular text, if we're going to compare it to Dark Knight Returns, for example, I think they've got some overlaps, and they're both interested in kind of bringing a realism to Batman and bringing a kind of sophistication to superhero comics, but they take really divergent ways to go there. Dark Knight Returns, if you remember, was really invested in the frenzy of the visible, as I said, quoting the Nadalianis article. There's tons of panels, lots of use of TV personalities and the talking heads to give context. Much less of that in The Long Halloween. This is a much more straightforward text, but I do think that it's interested in some similar problems and issues as Dark Knight Returns is, in terms of kind of a realism to the text, but rooted differently in terms of its visuals. You'll see on the left here, this is the first Batman comic that was ever written and produced. Came out in May of 1939 in Detective Comics number 27. And imagine you were a reader of this comic. Batman wasn't an established character at this point, and you're looking at the comic. You know it's about detectives. It's typically filled with crime stories, and we've got the unique adventures of the Batman. And you can see him here in this center portion. The way that the lines are constructed here, it looks like he's in movement. You can see that the hat is falling. Clearly, he seems to be swinging kind of that way. You've got two guys dressed relatively normal for the late 30s on the top of a building here. Batman must have struck readers during this time as kind of confusing, right? We didn't know if he was a good guy or a bad guy. He's a bat, right? He's dark when everything else is kind of light. These guys have guns. This guy, we can't really see his face because of the quality of the image, but it's a look of terror on him, on his face. He's being kind of dragged upwards by Batman. It's really unclear if it's a good guy or a bad guy, and I think that was intentional. And we still see that both in Dark Knight Returns and in The Long Halloween, where we have the fact that Batman exists in this kind of ethical gray area. And I think that really kind of owes to his history as a detective character that grows out of the film noir and detective fiction genres. Bill Finger and Bob Kane created Batman to be a direct response to Superman. You can read about this in Grant Morrison's book, Super Gods. You'll remember Grant Morrison last week from Joe the Barbarian. But whereas Superman is brightly colored, he operates in the daytime, he's about law and order and rules. Batman is dark. He's about an individual vigilantism. He is operates outside of the law. There's ways in which these characters are direct complements to each other. If you're not familiar with film noir, I'd suggest just going to YouTube and looking up Fritz Lang M and getting a sense of what that looks like. It was a film tradition that The Long Halloween owes much of its tone, its coloring, its pacing, its interest in crime and organized crime, and the central figure of the kind of troubled gumshoe detective that we see also in Rorschach and Watchmen comes out of this tradition in a lot of ways. And we often forget that Batman is supposed to be the world's greatest detective. He's supposed to be as good of a detective as Sherlock Holmes or any of those folks. And one of the things I like about Long Halloween, and one of the reasons I chose it, is that it embraces that part of the character that doesn't get a lot of screen time in a lot of other comics and a lot of other renditions of Batman. So, in terms of writing Batman, each story has to kind of reinvent the character. It's a character that's been around since 1939. So, unless you do something kind of different or interesting with it, it risks becoming redundant, right? And one of the things that Jeff Loebs does, I think, is to really kind of bring realism to the text, but differently than Dark Knight Returns. It shows Batman how he operates day to day within this kind of Gotham's crime-fighting apparatus, this trifecta of the DA's office, of the cops, which we get mostly through Jim Gordon, and then Batman is this kind of extra legal agent, but who still is thoroughly kind of integrated into the operations of the legal system of Gotham. So we've got really crime narrative. We've got the Falcone, VT, and Maroni families seem like stock mobster types from the 50s, right? The Falcone family is on top, fighting with the Maroni family, and the VTs are related to the Falcones. In terms of artwork, this is, as I said, largely noir inspired, and we can see from this scene right here that this is a young Bruce Wayne putting flowers on his mother's grave in the Mother's Day chapter. Look in the background, you see the outline of the tree here, the full moon, the dark gray, black, blue colors that saturate it, create shading through these blues. It's a real kind of feeling that noir tries to give, not only through like the fact that the subject matter is darker, it's about death and things like that, but also I think it wants us to kind of feel that darkness, the tension, the anxiety, the kind of psychological suspense that we have in the text and in the thematic kind of contents of these texts. So as Bruce Wayne is laying these flowers down, he's but a child himself, beloved wife and mother. And that kind of sadness we feel in him is captured in some ways in the image and the colors used to render that image. So there's largely muted colors throughout, as I said, a lot of blacks, grays, blues. We get spots of bright colors, particularly in the Joker chapter. And then the flashback scenes are almost entirely in black and white. One such is here, where we got Alberto. This is the first murder, Carla Viti, and we see someone turn out the light, shoot Alberto. He's dead, and then Carla finds all these things that have been left. What's interesting is as we read, we realize that Alberto isn't dead here, and of course that the final panel omits him is kind of one of those little gestures towards it's a little clue that this story, which is essentially a whodunit, right? Who is Holiday? It kind of one of those subtle things that on a rereading or a careful read will tell us that this isn't telling us like the whole story, right? So I think the black and white here, particularly when it goes to the murder scenes, the fact that we get black and white, one way to explain that is just really thinking about the noir genre, which is typically filmed in black and white. Here we have the Riddler on the right, and this is where he kind of sees Holiday, and Holiday shoots all around him. I don't know how many times he had to reload that .22 handgun, but doesn't necessarily have to be realistic. We get the Riddler here with his hands in front of his face. We can almost see him shaking, the way that the bullets have kind of spidered out. The kind of angular, almost avian features of most of the characters gives it this kind of strangeness, that speculativeness, that this is a version of our world but slightly different. And I think the art contributes to any feelings of kind of speculative fiction that might be in this text, that we're in a place that's not quite our place, right? So the very opening image, for example, where Bruce Wayne says, "I believe in Harvey Dent," you're probably surprised by that because he does not look like renditions of Bruce that we might see elsewhere. And I think that I picked this particular panel because I think it captures the anxiety, the suspense, the mystery. And then next time we see Riddler, he's kind of devolved into an alcoholic stupor. This scene where this is on 12.6, where we get Jim Gordon yelling, how long have you known, Batman, that Harvey Dent is Holiday? Of course, we as readers later learn that's not quite true, but there's no background here, right? There's no detail in the background, which kind of forces us to look at Jim's face. You see how it's kind of like leaned down. His shoulders look like he's almost kind of hunching over. He's clearly angry. His mouth is open in the act of yelling, how long? This is a panel that I think is really important because it's showing that Jim is an important character. It's showing that his relationship with Batman is one of kind of like mutually finding out who is the bad guy here. So I'm trying to, through the last few scenes, kind of demonstrate how you might do some close readings with the visual parts of the text. We also get, this text is really interested in Batman's rogues gallery, as it's called. We get almost nearly every major villain from the Batman universe in this text: Catwoman, Joker, Poison Ivy, Solomon Grundy, Riddler, Two-Face, and some others too. The Mad Hatter and Scarecrow, others that I just didn't have space for. But I think Jeff Loeb wanted to create a standalone series, and we get many of Batman's typical avatars in it. And in case you're not familiar with them, here's just some of them. You also see that they're all rendered pretty differently, which is potentially interesting. It's something you wanted to write about. I think there's certainly things to write about in that we get Poison Ivy that has these kind of shamrock greens that are different shades and kind of interestingly like splotchy and muted. And the Batman symbol around her neck kind of alludes to the fact that she's often a romantic interest of Batman's. Joker is really kind of tall, angular, exaggerated features, which may have something to do with his mental state. Catwoman is really kind of the typical female character in much of Western comics, with exaggerated physiognomy, really exaggerated like feminine features. She's Selena Kyle, of course, in real life, who has a on-again, off-again relationship with Bruce throughout Batman's history. Solomon Grundy, sort of minor characters, dead/undead, coming from an 18th century nursery rhyme. Riddler here, angular. You can see that he's missing, like his face is covered because he's mysterious. And then Two-Face, whose origin story we get a different version of here than you may be familiar with from other texts, right? And we see much of the text is really an investigation in how Harvey becomes Two-Face. We get his origin story in the text. We might think about origin stories too, because we get Bruce's, which is the same as it's kind of always been. So in some ways, Batman as a character, for him to be legible, for him to make sense to us as readers, has to be consistent, right? But Harvey you can kind of play with. So here's some questions. You recognize some of these from last time. This is a whodunit that offers many culprits throughout the novel. So how does the novel manage that? How does it keep the killer a secret? If you're surprised by it, why, right? So really think about how the text works. I'm not asking here for you to say, oh, it did a good job or did a poor job. That's really not the point. But saying, how does it disclose these small clues throughout? And, if you go back and look through it, did you see anything that you didn't see the first time? You just offer a close reading, a really detailed close reading from a particular page or panel and why you think it's really important to some aspects of the novel. Relate it to Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen, ideally drawing specific close readings from both. How does the art style contribute to the novels? You might think about those black and white scenes. You might think about how the different characters are characterized, or the difference between Batman here and how it was in Dark Knight Returns, for example. The text's cinematic qualities. Why do you think that it's been adapted? Why do you think it's been so influential on cinematic remediations of the Batman stories? What is it about its style, its pacing, its dialogue? And then finally, the genre. Christopher Nolan called this an epic tragedy. How is it epic? How is it tragic? Or how is it both, right? So incorporate a definition if you choose this one. All right, y'all, hope you enjoyed the text, and I'll see you again next week.